Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming to our session. My name is Jie Hui. I'm from T-Mobile. It's a great honor for me to stand here to tell you about how YouTube performance is improved in the T-Mobile network, together with other 4 cool guys who are really fun to work with. Kevin, Jeff from T-Mobile, Andreas, Ankur from Google. So before I start, I want to give you a little bit background about how the project started. So first, I want to ask a question. Can you raise your hand if you are attending Velocity for the first time? Quite a few, including all 4 of them. So actually 2 years ago, I was like one of you attending Velocity for the first time. And it's because of this platform, I got the chance to meet some of the cool guys from Google who care about the mobile performance as passionately as I do. So from then on, we created and also deepened the collaboration relationship between 2 companies. So in the past 2 years, we have done a lot of projects together. So today, in the scope of this talk, we are going to focus on one of the optimizations, which is bypass TCP proxy for the YouTube traffic in T-Mobile network. And as a result, we have seen improved video experience for the customers, meaning you will have less buffer time. Also, we have seen improved battery life, means with the same charged phone, you can watch longer video. And because of limited time, we are only going to introduce about other optimization very briefly in the end. Also, I'm going to ask you, please hold your questions till the very end. So before I start your project, recently I listened to Simon's Start With Why TED Talk, if you may have watched that. So I always ask myself, why do I take on this project? So I have my personal why and my professional why. I have a 9-year-old son who loves watching YouTube cartoon episodes. Recently, he loves the Pokemon. So I still remember one day when I was driving on the highway, then he was complaining and almost crying in the back. He said, Mom, it stops working. So I kind of like saying, Mark, Mommy is working on that. So my personal why is really, I really want this babysitter to do a good job when I want it to. I think many of you can relate, right? When you have kids in the restaurant, maybe when you are driving. And I also have my professional why. So traditionally, mobile operators, we monitor the customer experience by instrumentation in the network nodes, such like video call drop rate or availability. But as the mobile internet evolves, we also want to understand better about our customer experience by move one step closer to you guys, right? So we start with measuring what is the speed. But that's only an intermediate step, so that's why I call it 1.0 to 1.5. The ultimate goal is for us to understand how you are watching YouTube, how fast you can download the page, how fast you can load a video, or how smoothly you can enjoy your video. That's why we want to work with Google together to understand that. And there's a reason why we cannot directly translate the speed experience to the application experience, because mobile network has its unique characteristics. So now I'm going to hand over to Kevin to talk about those.
Thank you, Jean. So, personally, I really like the picture of Mark because it really gives a sense of who our actually joint customers are and what their expectations are. It wasn't that long ago when Jeff and I, actually, you notice, we're very scrappy. This is actually Jeff. I took that picture earlier yesterday. On the left there, wasn't that long ago when we had Wi-Fi and really kind of liberated you from sitting at the table with a network connection right to the wall. But it's largely local and you're mostly stationary. And frankly, if you needed power, you just take out your power adapter and you plug it in the wall. But today, as you see Jeff there in the right picture, customers expect high-speed data anywhere and everywhere. It really doesn't matter if they're in a car, if they're in the back of a car, in Mark's case, watching YouTube. You expect that consistent behavior no matter where you go. But one of the key factors in mobile networks is that you're actually sharing it with a large number of people. Now, this should be not new for anybody here. For those that run web services or web applications, you know the amount of data and connections to your services are increasing. But more importantly, here we're looking at a mobile trend. Pretty broadly across the world, the data is growing at 2, sometimes 3 times per year, and is compounding yearly. You can't hear me. Is this better? Better? Okay. Let me stay close to this. So, on the left there, you see the mobile data demand actually growing, compounding 2 to 3 times per year. It's very natural. It's happening all over the world. And as a result, a lot of us in the wireless industry have been looking at this problem of which we call the 1000x challenge. Because if you compound 2 times each year over a decade, you effectively need 1,000 times the capacity. And if you look at the right, what is generating all this traffic, right? You have apps, audio, images. But largely, it's video traffic and video streaming that's driving this data capacity need. So it's natural for us to then first go look at how we can optimize video traffic to be more efficient and to provide better QoE or quality of experience for our customers. But before we get deeper in the talk, I'd like to spend just a moment on giving some wireless 101. Throughout this talk, and as you research in this area or read up on wireless services, this is fairly common. You see the networks broken into 3 pieces. On the far left, you see the radio access network. That is your physical connection. That is your airwaves that communicates between your device and the cell tower. Now, it's a highly complex system for many reasons. As I stated earlier, many people share this network, and I would guess that all of us here have at least one cell phone with us today. So the radio access network needs to manage scheduling, who gets to know, who gets to go for how long and use the network. But there's also a channel condition difference, right? Right now, you and I are very closely together within the room. But from an outdoor perspective, your channel condition or your connectivity to the cell tower can be vastly different than mine. And because of that, devices and the network will use different power levels to transmit the same amount of data. And it may take a variation of the amount of time it actually takes to deliver that data. So the radio access network handles most of this work for you. And of course, finally, handovers, right? You cross the cell boundary, we hand over that connectivity for you. So a lot of this complexity is built within the radio access network. We handle that for you. But you should be cognizant of the fact that these devices aren't always connected. And we tend to let them rest as much as possible because of power consumption. Now, if you look at the core network, the piece sitting in the middle, and the far right being the external network where your servers and services probably sit, a big part of the core network is to ensure to harmonize the radio access network to your data centers such that we mask some of these lossy or kind of wireless behaviors, right? Wireless is inherently lossy. So the radio access network will detect losses and automatically retransmit packets on your behalf. However, where you're standing on the far side in the external network, you might perceive that lost packet and retransmission as a complete data loss because it looks like a particularly long delay. So these are some of the things that you should be cognizant of as you're developing your application because wireless environment just fundamentally works differently. So as we migrate in the US, all the major carriers are running LTE networks, and that's fantastic because latency and speeds are far superior than before. But there's also things we have to change on the core to adapt that, such that you see that same type of behavior on your server set. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jeff from T-Mobile, as well as Andreas from Google, to talk more about the actual video transmission.
Thanks, Kevin. So, unlike a wired network, a device on a mobile network must request and negotiate access to the radio resources. It must also go from an idle state to a connected state. So, depending on the radio access or depending on the technology, this can take anywhere from a few hundred milliseconds to several seconds. Once it's connected, the device can actually request access or request the content and download it, and it stays in the connected state until a few seconds after the data is actually finished transferring. This is important from both the user perspective and the network perspective, because being in a high-powered or being in the connected state uses a lot of resources. So both from the UE perspective of the battery and the network resources. So once the device actually requests the data, it doesn't communicate directly to the server. It goes through several nodes on the network. So the first one of the nodes it connects through is a NAT device, and that's necessary due to the limitation of IPv4 addresses. So we are working to limit that, since we were actually deploying new handsets with IPv6, but we'll still be using the NAT box for quite a while going forward. The other thing that it does is it connects through a mobile proxy. And so mobile proxies are widely deployed in mobile networks. They're used to hide the variability that Kevin referred to earlier that are inherent of wireless networks from the server side. So they're better able to adjust to the various conditions. They also hide any packet loss or corruption that happens on the internet side. So rather than actually passing that down over the radio access network, it'll normalize before it transfers it to the UE. Proxies can also apply various optimizations. They can cache, they can zip text to reduce the amount of content going down. Another optimization that they do for video is they can do just-in-time delivery. So with just-in-time delivery, the delivery rate is reduced to just above the encoded bit rate. And so the purpose behind this is to try to limit the amount of data transferred and not consumed or wasted. With our collaboration with Google, and since video is such a large portion of the network, we decided to see what happens if we bypass the proxy. So what we did is when we actually bypassed the proxy and measured the quality of experience and the impact of the network. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Andreas.
Thank you, Jeff. So now with the proxy not being between our caches here, actually I use the term GGC, which stands for Google Global Cache, and the handsets and the UEs. We need to make sure that we are good network citizens. And what I mean by that is that our caches should make sure that we fully utilize the network, but we don't really, but at the same time we protect it. And we actually use a combination of techniques to achieve this goal. And the first technique that we use is something called chunk delivery. And what this does is that actually our cache serves the video in separate chunks so that we make sure that only the video that the user has requested or a small or maybe a slightly bigger part actually gets delivered to reduce the wastage that Jeff mentioned just before. The combination, we also use a combination of two techniques to reduce to make sure that our cache does not send much faster than what the network can deliver. Generally speaking, our cache has a wired connection to the network, and therefore you see that the transmission rate can be much higher than the rate at which the network can really deliver traffic. And then if there is a persistent mismatch, this really leads to queuing in the network and potentially lost packets. So we try to make sure this doesn't happen. So to do so, we use a combination of two techniques. The first one is something called FQ pacing, and FQ stands for fair queuing, where we try to limit the transmission rate to a rate that is actually, we believe, is the right rate for the network. And this is especially important after being idle, because we have delivered a chunk and now we have a potentially very large or a large window, and then we want to make sure that the data comes out at a nice paced in a nice paced way. So that's FQ pacing. The other technique that we use is something called congestion window clamping. And congestion window in TCP is the amount of data that is in transit. The sender has transmitted, but then have not been acknowledged yet, and therefore they are in transit in the network. So we want to make sure that this is not really it's actually capped. So we actually use this congestion window clamping technique. And more generally speaking, we also use a TCP stack that tolerates the round trip time variance and also packet reordering that we have seen is inherent in the network. So these are the things that we do, as I said, to protect and also fully utilize the network. So in our experiment, we actually kind of compared the before and after, and using two types of metrics. The first one, the first category, is what I call here network level metrics, and these things include things such as the following: a number of TCP level metrics, things like the distribution of minimum round trip times. And we want the minimum round trip time to be as small as possible, and we want to make sure that we want to test whether the proxy actually injects any additional delay in the path, whether it actually is itself a bottleneck. We also want to look at the retransmission rates, and ideally this should be as small as possible. We look at the distribution of connection throughputs, and again, these we want to be as high as possible. And we also look at another metric that maybe you're less familiar with it, and this is really the ratio of median RTT. Basically, the value, the RTT value of half of the values are smaller and half of the values are larger. So we look at the ratio of median RTT to minimum RTT. If that ratio is 1, that means that essentially all the RTTs are equal to the minimum RTT. If that ratio is much larger than 1, this means that throughout the connection, you may have heard the term buffer bloat. Essentially, we have packets that are waiting in the queue to be delivered, and that really raises the RTT, the round trip time for those packets. So we want that metric to be as small as possible. And we also look at the network usage. Jeff mentioned that the proxies are there to make sure that we are not really wasting any bytes. So we want to see how can we do without them. So these are the network level metrics that we are going to look at. I mentioned there that we are using distributions, and we're using a particular way to actually compare distributions. So let me spend a little bit of time to actually explain what this metric is for those of you that may not be familiar with it. So as I said, we have the distribution of proxied and direct connections. So for example, we have the distribution of minimum RTT. We are looking at a few thousand connections. So, each one of these connections is a minimum RTT, so we kind of create a distribution of these minimum RTTs. And on the graph to your left is actually two distributions. Let's say the red one is the proxied connections, and the black one is the direct connections. So we have these distributions, but then, you kind of, how do you actually compare them? Because you cannot say, oh, the shapes look kind of the same, but not identical. So one way to do that is actually what is this quantile plot? You may have heard the term QQ plot. It stands for quantile to quantile plot. So what we do is that we take all these quantiles of the distribution and we create X and Y pairs. So, you see here you have an X1 and Y1 pair, and then we actually, this is a dot on my graph. So on the X-axis we have the X distribution, on the Y-axis we have the Y distribution. If these distributions were identical, then all the plots will line up on the diagonal X equals Y. Points that are above the diagonal means that this corresponding quantile from the Y distribution is higher than the X distribution, and vice versa. If the plots are below the diagonal, the quantile for the X distribution is larger than the Y distribution. So this is really what so it's a technique to kind of see whether the distributions are the same or which one is actually worse than the other. Okay, so let's look at the distribution of retransmitted bytes. Again, I remind you that these are we want this to be as small as possible. And on the Y-axis we have the proxied connections, and on the X-axis we have the direct connections. The green line is is the diagonal, means that the direct is equal to proxied. So you see that you can visually see that all the points are above the X equals Y axis, which means that kind of throughout the distribution in other words, for all the connections, proxy connections have higher retransmission rate, which is something that we don't really, we would like to improve. Next, we look at the distribution of throughputs. So this is again, let's say we have two lines. One is the proxied, the distribution of proxied connections, and then this is the blue line, and then there is the distribution of direct connections, which is the black line. And there are a couple of things that kind of you can easily see. First, if you look at the blue line, it has a peak at a smaller value. And this really kind of comes back to what Jeff was saying, is that the proxy is there to pace the traffic just above the video rate. And this really translates into a peak at a smaller throughput. The other feature that you see, if you kind of look at towards the right, is that the distribution of direct connections have a sharp, basically a sharp decline. And that is there because of what we said, these defensive measures that we took to make sure that we don't send too fast. So we have a kind of what we think is a conservative bound, and then we try to clip off everything after that. But if you look at the two distributions overall, you see that the black line is kind of shifted towards the right, which means that the overall direct connections have a higher throughput. And the higher throughput actually leads to good things, better quality, and as we'll see later, actually better battery utilization. So next, moving on to this ratio of median to minimum RTT. And again, we look at the two distributions. The blue line is the proxied connections, and the black line is the direct connections. And then you see here again that the blue line has a very pronounced tail towards the larger numbers. I have to tell you that you have to notice that the x-axis is actually on a log scale. So essentially, you see that in some cases, the median RTT is 10 to 100 times larger than the minimum RTT. So this is really kind of pretty large. So these are the essentially the TCP level metrics, and then actually Jeff will actually tell us about the network level metrics.
So one of the important things for us at T-Mobile was to make sure that by removing the proxy, we didn't negatively impact the network. So what we looked at overall volume, so busy hour, and then overall daily volume, and we saw that it followed almost the normal trend. There was a slight increase in traffic, but with the data growth that Kevin mentioned earlier, it was not significant. Yeah, I'm sorry. So we also looked at other RAN metrics such as PRB utilization and power, and those didn't show any significant changes either.
But at the end of the day, what we really care is application level metrics, what we call quality of experience. Like, kind of trying to make Mark happy. So we looked at those as well. So in order to let me try to define what these metrics actually look like. So here on the x-axis, a user starts presses the play button at time t0, and it takes some time for the video to start playing, and it only starts playing at time t1. So this, what we call joint latency, is the time between T1 and T0. Then the video plays smoothly until time T2, and at T2 we will actually have a rebuffering event, this dreaded spinning circle. And then only at time T3 the video will play again, and then we'll keep playing. So we are also interested in what we call total rebuffer time, which is the total amount of time that we spent rebuffering. In this particular case, is the time T3 minus T2. And the last but not least, we are also interested in battery lifetime, which really depends on the power consumption over the whole playback, from the time that the user presses the play button until stops watching the video. So I will use the same mechanism of the QQ plots to actually show you, in this particular case, rebuffer time. And again, on the y-axis we have proxied connections, and on the x-axis we have direct connections. And then you see that the rebuffer time for proxied connections is higher, and this kind of like is for the whole distribution. So essentially, they rebuffer more. To say differently, direct connections rebuffer for less time. Looking at joint latency, the story is the same. It takes more time for a video that goes to the proxy to start playing. And then Jeff will tell us about battery consumption.
So we also measured battery consumption. So for the average duration of a YouTube video on our network is about 140 seconds. And so for the average video, it saves between 16.5% and 20%, depending on the access technology. For different video durations, we see about a savings about 20%. The reason for this is because the proxy connections actually keep the radio on a high-powered state for the duration of the video, where the direct connections transfer for a shorter period of time and then allows the actual device, the radio, to go to sleep. So to summarize, bypassing the proxies improve the network KPIs. And at least the TCP level KPIs. We also saw that it didn't negatively impact the network, and that it improved overall user experience, which includes battery lifetime. And so next I'll pass it to Anchor with Google.
We had only limited time today, so we decided to focus on one area of collaboration that T-Mobile and Google did together. But there are actually a variety of different projects that we were working on in order to improve QoE all the way to the user. Google has a fairly extensive content delivery network, and we try to make sure that we deploy these GGC boxes as close to the users so that videos get cached closer to the user and get served from closer to the user. Also, these caches natively support IPv6, users behind IPv6, as well as can serve users even in the private IP space, and thereby help bypass carrier-grade NATs, which can also be something that causes performance regression. On the serving side, we've just started rolling out adaptive bitrate, and that makes sure that obviates the need for video transcoders, which could be another middle box that could cause performance regressions. One of the things that we were exploring was, would it make sense to cache videos even closer to the user, let's say at the base station, so that we could cut down on the bandwidth needed from the backhaul between the base station and the core network. But when we analyzed the YouTube workload, we realized that at the user aggregation numbers behind a base station, we just don't get the sort of caching efficiency that we would need. So we decided not to pursue this any further. Finally, we were looking at a bunch of different optimizations to reduce the load at the RAN itself. As an example, one of the things that we did together with T-Mobile was, based on the radio transition timers that they were using on a particular base station, we modified the size of the burst of a video chunk. And what that directly affected was the amount of time that the radio would stay awake and then go to the idle state. It would also reduce the signaling bandwidth on the network itself. As in another example, we were on another cell, we took some sort of a notification in terms of how congested the cell was and decided to pace the traffic at which we were serving to the user. Note that in both of these cases, we need some sort of notification about the radio state that is otherwise not available to the content provider or on the serving side. So as a result, one of the things that we are currently in the process of is experimenting with programmatic APIs to exchange this sort of information between, say, T-Mobile and Google. And one of the things that we just mentioned was, hey, what if T-Mobile could provide the congestion level, the radio state transition timers, or even throughput guidance to Google, which could then use this both on the serving and the client side to improve user performance. And on the flip side, Google would give T-Mobile aggregated numbers, anonymized numbers around QoE about the quality of experience that the users are actually observing. And that would help T-Mobile identify and diagnose problems as to where they exist on their network. We are exploring a bunch of different APIs, whether they're out of band that are exchanged between the control plane itself, or in band in the data path, or for that matter on the device itself. It's of interest on both sides to standardize these and take these to standard bodies so that other content providers and mobile carriers can benefit from the explorations and the experimentations that we are doing. In the end, we all want to make Mark happy. We want to make our users happy. And user happiness, not just measured in terms of network level metrics, but also QoE, application level QoE. And I guess like by how much noise Mark makes on the backseat. Happiness, user QoE is, the good thing is something that both content providers as well as mobile carriers have identified as something that they want to improve. And once we are past the low-hanging fruits that we can do independently in terms of improving mobile performance, we've come to the realization that there really is a need to do some sort of cross-layer optimization involving exchange of information between the mobile carrier as well as content providers. And that is an area that we are very interested in exploring further. If this is something that piques your interest, feel free to reach us out on these email IDs that are written over there. And I think with that, we'll take questions.
If it's possible, if you're close enough to me, I'll run out with the mic and have you ask the question. And if I can't reach you, if you guys could please repeat the question that comes from the audience so everyone can hear it.
You guys want to just come?
I have a question about the choice of the stack. So you mentioned TCP over IP, but for multimedia content, usually you use UDP over IP instead of TCP, because retransmission could be really too late for displaying the blog rather than just mask it off. So what are some of the justifications or reasons you choose TCP over IP?
Yeah, so I think I can take that. So actually, the majority of video delivered over the internet these days is over TCP. So all of YouTube is over TCP, and many other video providers deliver video over TCP. And this really has to do with the fact that it has to work through proxies and then NAT boxes and firewalls, and all of these things are kind of meant to work with TCP and port 80 or port 443, and then kind of a side effect of that. So we actually use TCP, and this is not really nothing really special. But definitely the points about maybe that's not the first thing you think about because of the retransmissions and the non-real time nature of TCP is true. Although we do much better these days. I hope that answers your question.
So, question for you. Actually, first of all, I want to thank you. I think what you're doing is great and really taking a step forward to improve mobile performance. But my question is, how does the whole net neutrality debate play into this, right? Because I think what you guys are doing is great, but others could look at this from the outside and say, oh, well, Google gets optimized access to the T-Mobile network, and would you let anybody into your network to do this? And how does that play into your thoughts?
That's a great question. So I think Kevin will answer this one.
That's a great question. Now, let me just start off by saying I'm not an expert in net neutrality, but this is something that comes up, and I want to address this. And frankly, it's been great to work with the Google team, us here at T-Mobile. And what we're striving to do at T-Mobile is really to be what we call the end carrier, to try and look after pain points, to improve user experiences for all of our users. So from that particular perspective, we actually welcome all of you to come talk to us about this, because we're sharing this joint learning for the desired behavior or for the desired output of all of you may be benefiting from this as well. So one of the ways you can contact us is through those mailboxes, but I'll also be here for a little while after the talk. So we'd love to connect with all of you to work jointly together, find collaboration, do some cross-layer analysis, or even just tell you, this is what we tried, these are things that didn't work for us, you might try it, you might not, but we love to collaborate, and it's very much in that sense that we're here today. But thank you for the question.
One question. Have you measured the effect of ads on quality of experience?
I can say that I have not measured that, but maybe Ankur knows better.
I can talk a little bit. So maybe it will be topic of a next talk, because we sponsor university research. So recently we submit a paper about exactly the video ad impact. So we did a study, and it's still early stage, and we would like to work with Google more on that as well. Thank you.
All right, let's do 2 more questions.
Hey, so this is great, the optimization you did by getting rid of the proxies. But do you think this optimization works well with only video kind of traffic, or would it also be helpful for all the web in general? Like, are these proxies helping the web traffic, or by removing them, can we gain those? Like Google.com, can it be improved by removing the proxies as well?
Yeah, the proxies. I think we need to take it on a case by case basis to make sure that it doesn't actually negatively impact the user experience. So we have been looking at that. So for different types of traffic to see how we can make it perform better, whether it's with or without the proxy. We have, yeah.
But
It's outside of this though.
can I add a point? Maybe Jeff can elaborate more. The reason proxy is there, it does help some of the slow devices, like a device on 2G or the slower device. So we have a need, right? Yeah.
Okay, so one more question, and then also the team said that they would make themselves available generally if you guys want to follow up individually with questions afterwards as well.
So for the streaming optimization, did you guys try anything to do with the, configuring frames per second, frame rate, things like that on the YouTube side to reduce the bandwidth usage, or is it there are no changes on the YouTube side itself?
Get it. So the question was, did we do anything to change the frame rate or essentially the video delivery rate? That's a great question. Actually, there is a talk tomorrow by YouTube folks to actually talk about what they did specifically to improve YouTube for mobile. And then, generally speaking, we are kind of mentioned it very briefly, is that we use a technique called ABR, adaptive bitrate, where the player actually kind of monitors the delivery rate and then adjusts, basically picks different video qualities to make sure that there is no rebuffering, and we play the best possible quality.
All right, thanks guys. Let's get a round of applause for the team here. Thank you.